All right. Well, thank you all for being here for the Prayer Collective Workshop. The title is A New Heaven and New Earth, with a focus on abolition and apocalypse. I am your presenter, Reverend Dr. Nikia Smith-Robert, the Executive Director of Abolitionist Sanctuary, which is a national coalition of Black serving churches, civic organizations, educational institutions united against the moral crisis of mass incarceration and the criminalization of impoverished Black motherhood. I'm excited to be here with you and to begin this presentation. So for our agenda, we'll briefly do community agreements. We'll talk about what is apocalypse, what is abolition, and how that is described or played out through the literary texts of James Baldwin and Octavia Butler, and then dispersed throughout the talk, we'll have some exercises to reflect on apocalypse and abolition, and ultimately think about how can we imagine abolitionist futures. So as we begin, I want to take this opportunity to begin our community agreements. That starts with agreeing to creating a brave space. And so this is an invitation to a brave space. Together, we will create brave space because there's no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. And then as we think about brave space, we also want to make room for 4 R's, which are to agree, to respect, to reflect, to repeat, and to reply. And for everyone who is in agreement with these principles and creating a brave space, I just ask that you would put up a thumbs up, and we will continue with the presentation. So what is the apocalypse? As we think about that question, I'm reminded of this verse in Revelations chapter 21, verse 1, that says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." Next slide, please. And so as we are thinking about the apocalypse and abolition, I want us to consider, what does it mean for us to await this new heaven and new earth? How does that materialize? How do we envision it? How does that provide a way of thinking about apocalypse and pointing toward abolition? And so we'll return to this kind of brainstorm or thinking through this new heaven and new earth. So here is how we, some of the ways in which we see the apocalypse presented in the Bible. Through Jeremiah, a prophet in the 6th or 7th century. You may know Jeremiah as the weeping prophet, and the ways in which Jeremiah is known to tell oracles that is condemning Israel's sinfulness, right? Speaking of divine judgment and calling the Israelites to repentance so that they can feel their destiny as a nation. We also see the ways in which the apocalypse is presented through John of Patmos, who is a 1st century Jewish follower of Jesus, wrote the book of Revelations, indicted the Roman Empire, envisioned the destruction of the Roman Empire as the end of the world, believed in the inauguration of a Christian paradise. So this apocalypse, right, it's both and, right? It's not just the ending of a world, but it's the ushering in of a new world, right? That the old heaven and earth must pass away for this new heaven and earth to take place. And this is going to be really important, right? As we think about apocalypse as both a pronouncement of judgment of the sinfulness of a nation, right? The ways in which it calls us to lament and condemn, right? The ways in which it is a way to tell of divine judgment and a call to repentance. So as we kind of map the apocalypse with abolition, which we'll describe next, is both the ending of something, right? And it's also the envisioning, the imagining of something new in its place. And so that's going to be very important. So as you think about the apocalypse, it's not just crying that the end of times is near, right? It's not just to say these are the last days, but there's also this understanding that as we are condemning injustices, as we are lamenting against the nation's sinfulness, right? Kind of these social sins of injustices, that there's also hope for liberation, and that we can believe in this inauguration of a new society, a more just and equitable world. So I want us to think about this new heaven and new earth as a both and, the ending and the beginning of something new. Thank you. Next slide. So by translation in the Greek, the apocalypse means revelation or disclosure. It's a tradition that began in the book of Daniel and Revelations. It's this understanding that it is imminent, it is coming soon, right? That there is something catastrophic that has precipitated, right? The ending of something, this, that there is crises, and that it also involves miraculous, that perhaps the injustices and the pain and the grief and the struggle is so overwhelming that it's only by act of the miraculous that something new can emerge. And how we think about that, right? Because it is has this otherworldly nature to it, is that we can envision it, whether it's through dreams, right? Whether it's through symbolism, that we can use kind of a framing beyond this world in a transcendent way, to have hope for something more than the perilous nature of our current times, right? It is also collective, it is terrestrial, it is of the earth, and it's total, it's in its completion, that everything in that old order must pass for the new to take its place. It's also a force beyond human control. It leads to transformation of life on earth, and we'll see more about this theme of transformation through the literary works of Octavia Butler. The apocalyptic text gives hope and consolation to people going through crises. Seen as a pessimistic view, it includes divine judgment of moral degradation, the persecution of the good, triumph over the wicked, and vindication of the just. And we'll see a lot of this in the Baldwin text, okay? So I want to kind of place these markers so that as we get to these readings, you'll be able to make some connections, right? And it's also to resist empire or power, right? Oppressive powers. And then there's this understanding of apocalyptic eschatology, right? This kind of hope in the here and not yet, that though these struggles are happening here, right? That there is still hope for liberation that has not yet come, right? That we can point beyond the imminence of the crises and the catastrophic that are consuming us here, and hope that something better is beyond. And then for those who are from the liberationist theme, that beyond, right, isn't far away, right? That beyond can be heaven on earth, right? It could be liberation that we live and actualize and realize here today. And so that is the salvific nature of the apocalypse, the hope for liberation, the hope for something better here and now. So as we are, the nature of this workshop as it was given to me has this focus on lament. So as we're thinking about apocalypse, right, this kind of pronouncement of the social sins of a nation, the kind of acknowledgement of the catastrophic and the crises that are so overwhelming that it must point to the end of times, right? The final days. What can we think about as our own current modern day crises? So I just want you to take a moment to write in your notes, what if you were to lament, what crises would you say that we are facing today as a country? So we see how Jeremiah was talking about the crises in his day as a 7th and 8th century prophet, right? John of Patmos is talking about the crises of his day. What crises are we facing today as a country, as a community, and personally? So I just want you to take a few minutes to jot your thoughts down there. And lament being specifically an expression or prayer of grief and sorrow. What is your complaint against God? Your complaint against perhaps the President of the United States, right? What is your grievance to a people who are suffering? What is your lament? Okay. All right. So Grace, is it okay if I open it up for people to share, or would you prefer this to be okay? Does anyone want to share what some laments you may see or have about our country, community, personally?
Hi, this is Kim. I am not Zoom facially ready nor hair, but as a country, all of the isms that we have, racism, classism, sexism, all of those things. As a community, I lament over seeing food deserts, food insecurity, homelessness, all of the things that we believe to be our basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter, communities and across this country, we are facing. As personally, I see inflation, dealing with this inflation that's going on right now, and everything is going up and not my paycheck. So that's my lament, and trying to continue to keep faith in keeping faith in the process.
Yes, thank you so much. That's wonderful. I really appreciate the ways in which you grappled with those questions and had vulnerability and transparency to trust this brave space. So thank you. And those are very real concerns. And I think I could say assuredly that those are not concerns that you have alone. And that is the collective component of apocalypse, right? That there are people who are grieving together, right? Who are struggling together. And so I want to also lift up, in addition to your list that is an apt critique of the crises that we face today, I also want to lift up the crises of the criminalization of Black motherhood, right, and Black womanhood. So Black women are amongst the fastest growing prison population. And 80% of women who are incarcerated are mothers. So in addition to mothers being overrepresented in prisons, Black mothers are also more likely the sole providers in their households. And as they are the sole providers for their household, having the unique responsibility to nurture and care for themselves and their families, they often do so with their backs against the wall, because Black women are the poorest than any other ethnic group except for Native American, right? Black women make about 63 cents to the dollar as their white male counterparts. Right. So I'm lamenting the ways in which I am the product of a poor single Black mother living in Harlem, New York, who I had to watch make really difficult decisions in order to survive and provide quality of life for herself and her family against those inequities, those economic inequities, right? And the ways in which her survival could be often criminalized in ways that condemns her agency, but says nothing about the larger structural injustices that create the conditions that makes it so hard to survive in the first place, right? So when we apply this apocalyptic narrative, it is a critique of those structures, right? Those power structures, those interlocking systems of oppression, right? And it is to claim a collective or shared narrative with others who are suffering in the midst of those oppressions. Let me see this chat. Okay, next slide, please. So we talked about apocalypse. Now, what is abolition? Okay, so according to Miriam Kaba, the prison industrial complex abolition is a political vision, a structural analysis of repression, and a practical organizing strategy, a vision of a restructured society, right? A new heaven, new earth, a restructured society in a world where we have everything we need: food, shelter, education, health, art, beauty, clean water, and more things that are foundational to our personal and community safety. Next slide, please. Ruthie Gilmore says it this way: abolition is about presence, not absence. It's about building life and affirming institutions. So when we think about prison abolition, I shared the statistics about Black women and the carceral state, right? When we think about abolition, it often comes under critique because it feels like a negative project. But in fact, what Ruthie Wilson Gilmore is saying, that abolition is not just a negative project, right? It's not just about tearing things down. It's not just about the old heaven and the old earth passing away. But abolition is also a positive project. It's about building something new. It's about the new heaven and the new earth that comes in its place. Next question. Next slide, please. So again, as we are thinking about what does this scripture mean in the context of apocalypse and abolition, I want us to begin imagining, right? Using our imaginations to think about what is the new heaven, what is the new earth, as a response to those laments, right? The inflation going up and my salary not moving at all, right? How does our imagination, our creating this new heaven, new earth, respond to the laments of the old heaven and the old earth? Next question. Next slide, please. So apocalypse, what does abolition teach us about the future, right? This is another question that I want us to think about, and you'll see it in the final slide where you'll have an opportunity to do a free write and reflection there. Next slide, please. So now let's get into some of the texts, Baldwin and Butler. Okay, so we'll take some time here. So James Baldwin in No Name in the Street was published in 1972. At the same time, we hear of Nixon's urban crisis, right? We get Nixon's law and order, tough on crime, law and order policies, right? His administration states that that as a result of the urban crisis and his law and order policies, that crime has gone up 2.5 times more than the previous 4 years, and that drugs had increased 11 times as much, right? So this is the crisis that James Baldwin is writing. James Baldwin in No Name in the Street is a literary text that has been categorized within the apocalyptic tradition, okay? And so as we look at this apocalyptic formula, right, this lamenting of kind of the last days, the crisis, the catastrophic that's happening, this is the crisis of that James Baldwin is referring to, of the 20th century. And so No Name in the Street contains 2 essays and an epilogue, Take Me to the Water and To Be Baptized. We'll focus on To Be Baptized. Baldwin's apocalyptic vision through spiritual biography is kind of the genre and the ways in which he's writing. And then No Name is a quote from the book of Job, also a point toward the apocalyptic, right? In chapter 18, verse 17 through 18, we see this quote referencing no name and the prophecies of the annihilation of the wicked. It is a code warning, this text, right? This text is a code warning for white people, okay? That there is a new morality of the oppressed that is resisting the catastrophic, that is resisting racial capitalism, that is resisting police brutality and resisting kind of the crises of that time. Next slide, please. And so Baldwin takes an apocalyptic turn by abandonment and judgment of America. So his lament is, quote, all of Western nations have been caught in a lie. And that lie is this pretense of humanism, okay? And because of that, Baldwin concludes that Western societies history has no moral justification, right? When we think of America's original sin of racism and the slaveocracy and Jim Crow South and lynching, right? That America's history has no morality to it, right? It has no moral justification or moral authority. And so Baldwin is critiquing the tyrannical use of power, and he's looking specifically at racism, namely racial capitalism. He's looking at the Vietnam War, and he's also looking at police brutality. And so I want to carry this theme with us as kind of this case in point is the carceral state, right? That gives us a framework to work in. Next slide, please. So this is a quote from the text that we're looking at, and I'll say, when I taught this at Cook County Jail, the women there read the entire book, and they also read various chapters from Octavia Butler. But in this condensed version, I'm trying my best to provide the context because we have not had the time to read that text together. And so I just want to highlight a few quotes. So here, Baldwin says, the powerless, by definition, can never be racist. They can never make the world pay for what they feel or fear, except by the suicidal endeavor which makes them fanatics or revolutionaries or both. Whereas those in power can be urbane and charming and invite you to those which they know you will never own. The powerless must do their own dirty work. The powerful have it done for them, okay? So here, Baldwin is making a critique of power in a way that is dichotomized between the power and the powerless. And which group does Baldwin and other Black people belong to here is with the powerless, right? And the only ways in which to overthrow these oppressive powers, he's saying, is this suicidal endeavor, right? That makes them fanatics or revolutionaries. And we see how martyrdom has played out in trying to overturn and overcome those injustices through King, through Malcolm X, two of which are kind of the backdrop in which Baldwin is writing about, right? In the wake of the funeral and the assassination of Malcolm X. Next slide, please. So also in the To Be Baptized, Baldwin tells the story of his experience in Europe, okay? Traveling to Germany to visit a friend who was in prison. His friend was falsely convicted for a murder in New York City's Greenwich Village in 1967. Baldwin describes the prison as a complex of intimidating structures. And so in the book, he gives this detailed narrative of the inhumane conditions of visiting his friend in prison. And then when waiting to see his friend, Baldwin shares the following reflection. And this to me is just so profound. He says, human help often arrives too late. And if the person has really turned his face to the wall, no human being can help. So just take a moment on that last slide. Human help, what does it mean that human help often arrives too late, right? And when we think about the apocalyptic tradition, particularly the ways in which it points to eschatology, this hope beyond our human suffering, right? How does the apocalypse and eschatology gives us hope when human help arrives too late, right? That is the ways in which we are wrestling. That is the wrestling that King had when he wrote his speech that I've been to the mountaintop, right? That he looked over, right? He's talking about his current circumstances, the suffering of this world, but he had been to the mountaintop, this envisioning, this symbolism of something that points beyond the imminence of the catastrophic and the crises that are overwhelming and plaguing a particular people within a sinful nation, right? So what does it mean for human help to arrive too late? And how often does a particular group of people experience that, right? And what circumstances can lead those people, can lead people to turn their face to the wall, or where Howard Thurman says, the wall of no retreat, right? This having your back against the wall of no retreat, and how James Baldwin is saying when we get to that wall, it's too late. Not only is it that human help arrives late, but if we get to that wall, then it's a wall of no retreat, that we don't come back from it. So as he's visiting his friend, he assesses the situation, and he says that his friend, even though he's being falsely convicted, even though he's detained in German's prison, that he had not yet faced the wall, right? So there is some hope there. And I would say some eschatological hope. Next slide, please. So that's the Baldwin piece, right? And how I want to place Baldwin in conversation with Butler is I want to use Baldwin as the part of the apocalypse that is condemning a unjust America, right? That is prophetically pronouncing the judgment on America, right? And it's through its unjust criminal system, right? The police brutality, Vietnam War, racial capitalism, through all the issues, right? Nixon's tough on crime policies, that Baldwin is doing this part, right? As an oracle, as a mouthpiece of God. And now I want to turn to Butler and the ways in which she's pointing to the future, right? This as a way to imagine a world that gives us hope beyond the crises of the day. So the parable of the sower is the text that we'll focus on. If you don't know Octavia Butler, and I'm sure you do, she was born in 1947, and yeah, I see some cheering. And in fact, I believe she's just made it to the big screen. And if you haven't, I strongly recommend you do a Google search for Monica A. Coleman. Dr. Monica A. Coleman is in conversation and has some upcoming talks about her work on Octavia Butler. So Butler was born in Pasadena in 1947. I lived near Pasadena. She was the first science fiction writer to receive a MacArthur Fellowship. She published 2 novels known as the Parable or Earthseed series. The first book is called Parable of the Sower, which we'll focus on, and the second in the series is Parable of the Talent. So this parable of the sower is this futuristic response to dystopia. The protagonist is a 15-year-old girl named Lauren Oya Alamina. She has a hyper empathy syndrome, which means she can feel the suffering of individuals around her. The story is set in a dystopian California in the 2020s. And Lauren struggles with her religious beliefs. She forms a new belief system called Earthseed, which explores a future on other planets. And in the final days, hint apocalypse, right? In the final days, when her town, Robledo, is destroyed, everyone is killed, including her family. Lauren and two others survive and flee north. They recruit diverse members along the way and names their new community. Remember the apocalypse having that collective component. The new community in Northern California is named Acorn. Next slide, please. And so for the next few slides, because we don't have the opportunity to read this in advance, I'm just going to highlight a few of Octavia Butler's poems in that book, Parable of the Sower, that focuses on change, right? We mentioned part of the apocalypse being transformation, right? And transformation also being essential to the abolitionist project, right? So let's think about, as Octavia is envisioning the future, the ways in which change is guiding that. So she says, all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change, right? And for some people, they want to substitute, and rather God, they may want to say abolition is change, liberation is change, equity is change, right? Here, God is change. Okay, next slide, please. Another poem says, we do not worship God. We perceive and attend God. We learn from God. In the end, we yield to God. We adapt and adore, for we are earth's seed and God is change. Next slide, please. She also says, God is power, infinite, irresistible, inexorable, indifferent, and yet God is pliable, trickster, teacher, chaos, clay. God exists to be shaped. God is change. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. Okay, so as we are looking to conclude our time here, because I want to leave time for discussion, I'm just trying to set these texts up together in conversation to help frame our understanding of apocalypse and abolition that's rooted in a kind of the condemnation of the old heaven and earth and this imagining of a new heaven and earth, right? That is rooted in change and transformation. I want us to think about, I want us to do the work of Octavia Butler, okay? And I want us to do the work of of James Baldwin. So in the first exercise, we did a free write, right? That was the work of Baldwin. What are the things that we are lamenting? And now I want us to do the work of Butler. What are we envisioning as a response? And what does that future look like? So take a moment and answer the question, if you could time travel to the year 2099, what new world would you want to see? Thank you. That's a good lament. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. I'll be sure to read this to the group. So I won't keep us much longer because I know We had a slight late start due to technical difficulties, and people will have commitments, and I want to honor your time. So for the next few moments we have, I just want to open it up for questions, for you to read your reflections on how you are envisioning a new earth, a new world. That here is 2099, but we hope that it will come much sooner. But yes, let's open it up. Let me just begin with Daryl Brown, that says that his lament, I'm sorry, let me see your pronouns. I don't see your pronouns. Daryl's lament is that we live in a world of abundance, but the capitalist narrative forces us to live as though there is scarcity. So much pain results from this calculus. And then Daryl's new world would be one where abundance is recognized and equitably distributed. Before you leave, Daryl, do you want to say anything about that?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, I know the whole idea of abundance and scarcity is not unique. It's kind of recognized by people that care pretty broadly. And the thing is that the solutions to so many of our problems are simple, right? We just got to stop concentrating all the wealth in the top 1%'s hands, and there'll be plenty for everybody else. I mean, I read somewhere where we could cure hunger for about 130, between 35 and 130 billion dollars a year. Global hunger would be cured. And in the US, we spend almost $800 billion a year just on military spending. So, it's all about priority. It's all about priority. And we just got to work to change the priorities.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so that is also a abolitionist project, because when we think of Jesus, right? Jesus's life and ministry, it was turning the social orders upside down, and that was a reprioritization, right? Or what Niebuhr might call the transvaluation of values, right? So that the last will become first, and the fools will shame the wise, right? As we reprioritize our values as a nation, the last become first, right? The poor are blessed. And so, yes, that is a liberationist project that I think points to abolitionist futures and is also grounded in the gospel, this kind of gospel message of liberation. Is anyone else who wants to share their vision for the new heaven and a new earth? Thank you.
Hi. My name's Kamaka Champion. My pronouns are she and her. It took me a moment to kind of think about, what I lament about, like what's the underlying. And I think one of the things is this lack of feeling, and that leads to this denial where we're not looking at people, and this kind of suppression of how we feel. Today, I actually just saw something on Yahoo that was talking about there's a federal investigation going on about some of the abuses to women in federal prisons. And, sometimes I've been in conversation with people and we talk about things that are happening in prisons or just in poor neighborhoods. And it's almost like, well, first of all, like it didn't really happen, or those people deserved it, or what about the ones that, really, just this justification of brutality and this lack of consideration. And I even think, just personally, the things that have happened to me, I think it's because someone just didn't consider me and didn't see me. And when you feel unseen or you feel like no one cares, there's a hopelessness that comes with that. And there's even a hopelessness for me about, God, did you see that? You're supposed to be the God who sees, but did you see that? Because you didn't say anything, or I didn't hear you say anything. You may be saying something, but I didn't hear it, And so I think, in 2099, maybe I would like to see a world where people can truly see and people can truly hear. Like, can you hear the pain can I hear the pain of the mother who has been in prison? Can I hear that? Can I really see it? and feel it, and then maybe some of the decisions that we're making, we think more carefully about, because I'm actually seeing, the damage of my consumption, of having to have more and more and more and more, and how that's burdening another person, or, where am I living, and how was that affecting the people who did live, who were displaced, so that I can live comfortably, so those are the things that, I'm, just kind of thinking about, or thinking about, Brittany Griner, for example, getting released, and thinking about, and I feel for her, but how the American people just seem so outraged about what could possibly be happening in a Russian prison, and what is actually happening to people, that are over here, or for the man who was left behind. And you're telling us you had no choice but to leave him. You had a choice and you made it, and so that whole denial, again, of denying what our, hiding our hands, I hope that we could, that would be something different.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really powerful. And what I want to really echo in the things that you're saying is that part of our lament, right, gives us permission to say, well, where were you, God, right? On the streets of Ferguson with Mike Brown's body, lifeless body there, as a result of an unjust police killing. Where were you? Where were you in Sanford, Florida with Trayvon Martin, right? Where were you with Breonna Taylor and Renisha McBride and Sharon, Karen Shirley, Michelle Shirley, right? Where were you, right? And it's not a new lament, because the slaves said it this way: how long? Right? How long must we suffer to the hands of state violence? How long must we suffer to inequities? How long must we suffer? How long must we go unseen and our humanity unrecognized? And so I think that is a righteous lament, right? And I also like the ways in which you're envisioning the future, or the abolitionist response, as the recognition of our humanity, right? That the injustice is when we go unseen, but the just response is to see us, right? And what I also like about what you're saying is something that Octavia Butler did, right? She made the superpower empathy, that we will no longer be desensitized to these injustices, but that we would have a radical sense of feeling each other's pain, right? Of being interconnected in this shared humanity, right? That is inescapable. And that builds the beloved community, right? That is the collective project. So with that, I want to just finalize on the next slide. Abolitionist futures. Is there a slide after that? There you go. So when we think about a womanist vision of Afrofuturism, right, we're thinking about Barbara Holmes just did this is like hot off the press. Barbara Holmes just did a Zoom session about her vision of a womanist Afrofuturist view. And I want to hold that with the abolitionist project, right? So what I like about what Barbara Holmes says, Dr. Holmes says, we are revolving realities and ambiguities with a future, right? That you don't have to know everything about me. We don't have to figure out this abolitionist project. When people say no police, the response is often, well, then how do we keep communities safe, right? Abolition is not an absolutism, right? It is not a singular answer, but it's an invitation into a project of liberation to think about what those alternative responses will look like, so that we're no longer acting with desensitivity towards injustices, right? That we are no longer turning our backs and being silent about the suffering of others, that we are no longer justifying, right, America's values that limit and disclose the civil and human rights of Black people, that police violence is not okay, right? So abolition requires us to sit with the ambiguities, to sit with the revolving realities, knowing that there is a future, right? There is an eschatology. There is a hope beyond the present suffering and state violence, right? That abolition invites us to create and imagine and think about, similarly to how the apocalyptic writers are doing it through Baldwin, through Butler, through John of Patmos, right? Through Jeremiah, through symbols, through visions, through dreams, through art, through prayer, right? And so Afrofuturism is a philosophical, artistic, and sci-fi reclamation of past, present, and cosmic future of African diasporic people. So it is to understand that if we are going to look to the future, the not yet, that we also have to embrace the here and now and what has happened before us, right? That it is a Sankofa event, that we can look behind us and the ways in which that history informs where we are and where we are going. And then finally, and then also Dr. Holmes says that Black speculative tradition is the progenitor of Afrofuturism. And we saw that through Octavia, right? So when people are talking about Afrofuturism as a project, it has its roots, right, in the Black speculative tradition, such as these writings of Octavia Butler. Next slide, please. And this is how we can realize, according to Barbara Holmes, a womanist future and its possibilities, that we have to recover the past, right? That past is understanding America's rich legacy, right, in racism, particularly racial capitalism that profited off of the labor and the bodies of Black people through the slavocracy, after Reconstruction, through conflict leasing, and now we see through the prison industrial complex. And then we have to think about this counterintuitive response. And that is the exercise that we did in Imagining a Future in 2099. It's counterintuitive because the American project would have us to think that capitalism, right, and these oppressive systems is the only way. But the counterintuitive response that is rooted in abolition lets us know that there are alternatives, right? That there is a world where everyone can meet their basic needs and have what they need to thrive. And then finally, it's unveiling what is possible through this cosmic transcendence, right? That is beyond human control, but that can absolutely be materialized here and now. I think that was the last slide. Yes. So you can close that presentation. Thank you so much. And so as we conclude, we think about apocalypse. It is the proclamation of the injustices, the suffering, the pain, the grief, the struggles that inform a catastrophe or a crisis that we are experiencing, right? But it's also a call to transformation, right? This new heaven and new earth. And that you and I have a responsibility, right? An invitation to imagine what that new world would look like. And it sounds to me that you all are imagining a new world that is absolutely pointed towards justice, towards love, towards liberation. Thank you so much for your time. Again, I am Reverend Dr. Nakia Smith-Robert, founder, executive director of Abolitionist Sanctuary. You can find us on Instagram at Abolitionist Sanctuary, as well as Facebook and Twitter. You can also sign up for updates at www.abolitionistsanctuary.org. I'll put that in the chat and I'll give it to Grace for the remainder of the program.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Nakia, for spending time with us today and really breaking down what it means to see abolition as apocalypse, and especially looking at abolition as not just a negative project, as you said, but something that we're creating, and the ways in which we can even connect that to scripture with Revelation and what is this new heaven and new earth. And I really appreciate you speaking about the not yet, but already here. So thank you so much. And thank you, all of you that attended. Different ways to keep connected with Abolitionist Sanctuary in the chat. I also will be sending a follow-up email, and I'll include all of that contact information in the follow-up email as well. So So thank you all for spending an evening with us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you. Have a good evening.